Once again, yes, I'm using the 3DS version of Majora's Mask here, and I know that the 3DS version, a lot of people aren't particularly big fans of it. I'm aware of the various differences and changes and whatever with this version of the game, but personally, I really don't care that much about the graphical changes. I think the 3DS version looks perfectly fine, even if it's not exactly the same as the original game. Once again, I prioritize having a good frame rate primarily, so this is kind of the no-brainer version of the game to go with. However, there are a number of things about Majora's Mask 3D that I also am not a huge fan of. But that is why, for this video, I played the Restoration Project, a mod for the 3DS version of the game that makes some changes to it to make it a bit more similar to the original Majora's Mask, as well as adding some nice quality of life features, such as skipping the Ocarina replay of certain songs, like the Song of Soaring or the Elegy of Emptiness, and the best addition that this has is that the transformation masks are set to the D-pad, which is just so nice, way less menuing than you normally would have to do. I love it. So yeah, the Restoration mod is really, really cool. I'll have a link to it in the description. If you're gonna play Majora's Mask 3D, I would say this is a must-have thing. You gotta install this, man. It kinda just makes the game objectively better. Plus, there are also a number of other things I like about the 3DS version of Majora's Mask in particular, like the much more useful Song of Double Time and the Bomber's Notebook, which is way, way better for tracking all the different quests and keeping time and everything. Really, really nice, and that's stuff you don't get in the original version of the game. Anyway, as for Majora's Mask itself, this is one of those games that I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's one of those things where, you know, you have those long-running series where there are, like, the two entries that are very similar to each other, and there's a real split in terms of which one people think is better. I think of, like, Sonic 2 versus Sonic 3, or Sonic Adventure 1 versus Sonic Adventure 2, or Mega Man 2 and 3, Dead Space 1 and 2. You know, those games that, like, they're both really, really good, and they're really similar, and no one can really agree on which the better one is. I'm not 100% sure if this is the case, but I imagine Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask is also one of those cases. But personally, if you ask me, it's not even remotely a discussion. There is no question at all. Majora's Mask is so much better than Ocarina of Time, it's not even comparable. This game basically takes everything that was already great about Ocarina of Time, but then it fixes a number of the issues that game had, and then on top of that adds a whole bunch of extra cool stuff to make it even better. First of all, the 3-day system in this game and the time loop, I think, is insanely awesome. It is so cool. Like, first of all, I just love time loop shit in general. I think that's a really interesting premise. But also, it does the time loop thing so well that no game would even come close to doing this as well as Majora's Mask until The Outer Wilds. And if I'm comparing a game to The Outer Wilds, that is some fucking high praise. And there's a lot of stuff about the time loop that I like, but I'm gonna get into that a little bit later on. But suffice it to say, I think the time loop is a really interesting, cool idea, and I think it's very, very well done in Majora's Mask, and it makes this game really stand out compared to every other Zelda game. And then the other game's major gimmick, the masks, that's really cool as well, that once again, I'll get more into detail in a little bit. But just the transformation masks alone, I think, are worth really highlighting because I think they're such an awesome idea done so well. Because Ocarina of Time was already playing with that idea of having different forms that grant you different abilities between having Kid and Adult Link. But now this game takes that concept and pushes it so much further and so much better, having Deku Link, Goron Link, and Zora Link, and these three transformations, one, are just really cool from like a lore perspective that you get to play as all these different unique Zelda races, but then from a gameplay perspective, they are like the ultimate items, because essentially what these transformations are consolidations of various different items from Ocarina of Time. Like, you look at Zora Link, and Zora Link really is just the boomerang, the Zora tunic, and the iron boots all bundled together into a playable character, with some new stuff thrown on top of it as well. And that makes these transformations by far the most useful items in a Zelda game, because items in Zelda are ways to interact with the world in unique ways, and how useful those interactions are is what makes a good Zelda item. You know, a bad Zelda item is the one where you only use it 2 times in the game in those very specific instances where the game makes you use it, and then other than that, the item is useless. But these 3 forms, because they all have so many different utilities, they are all extremely useful, and you're going to be using them throughout the entire game all the time. And because each of these different forms has so many different unique things it can do, it also means that the gameplay and design of Majora's Mask is also much more varied than Ocarina of Time, because it takes more advantage of these very wide movesets with lots of different stuff. And because of that, I would argue, if you can even really count them, I would say the transformation masks in this game are by far the best items that have ever been in any Zelda game. The amount of variety and cool things that they add to the game is completely uncomparable to anything else. And just those 2 factors alone already makes Majora's Mask a really cool and interesting game to me, but then on top of that, it does so much stuff from Ocarina of Time, but kinda just better than that game did. Like the dungeons in this game, I would say that in general the dungeons are pretty on par with the dungeons from Ocarina of Time, meaning that they're very good. But because of the transformation masks, I would put these dungeons a little bit above the ones from Ocarina of Time, because here all the dungeons have an additional thing on top of the things that they already have going on. Because not only do they have their unique gimmicks and gameplay elements, but they all have a different mask associated with them. The first dungeon you do heavily relies on the Deku mask, and then the second one is the Goron mask, the third one is the Zora mask, and then for the final dungeon you're using all of them in tandem with each other, which not only adds more variety and opportunity for interesting puzzles and stuff in the dungeons, but it also makes them more fun to play, because I think all of the masks are really enjoyable to just use. You know, rolling around at high speed with the Goron mask is super fun, swimming around with Zora mask is great, and using the flowers to launch yourself up and float around with the Deku mask is also really good, and all these different masks and their unique movement abilities also add for much more verticality in Majora's Mask compared to Ocarina of Time. This game definitely takes much more advantage of the 3D space than Ocarina of Time did. Really, the only things about Majora's Mask dungeons I would say that put them below the dungeons of Ocarina of Time is that, one, there's only 4 dungeons in the game, so there's just not that much dungeon gameplay in this, but I don't think that's a huge issue, and I'll get to that a little bit later on. But also, the stray fairies can be slightly annoying. In general, I think the stray fairies are kind of a cool thing. The only problem is if you get to that point where you finish the dungeon and you're still missing like 1 or 2 stray fairies and you're like, fuck me, where is that fucking thing? Because while going through the dungeon and solving it initially can be very enjoyable and very problem-free, when you have to backtrack and go to earlier parts of the dungeons, some of these dungeons can make that a real pain in the ass, particularly the last 2. My word of advice would be to use the Great Fairy Mask very aggressively and be certain that you're getting all the stray fairies as you go through the dungeon, because you do not want to fucking miss one. That can definitely be a nightmarish experience sometimes. It happened to me during the last dungeon here, and it was not my favorite. But outside of that, I would say the dungeons of Majora's Mask, as few as they are very solid. However, while Majora's Mask having very few dungeons at first seems like a bad thing, in the end it actually turns out to be a huge boon to the game. Because with Zelda games, they are split into the dungeon stuff and the overworld stuff, and I find that every Zelda game, you can kind of judge them based on how good they are in one category and how good they are in another category. Like with Ocarina of Time, very good dungeon stuff, but pretty weak overworld stuff, I would say. However, with Majora's Mask, I would say that its strengths are completely flipped. The dungeons here are the weaker part of the game, and the dungeons are still really good. But the overworld stuff in Majora's Mask is not just vastly improved over Ocarina of Time, it is incredible. It is probably some of the best overworld gameplay that there's ever been in any Zelda game. The overworld here is so incredibly fun. And there's many reasons for that, one of them being that Termina is a much smaller map than Hyrule was. Hyrule was very large, but it was also very empty. There was a lot of just running from place to place in that game. But with Majora's Mask, Termina is much smaller than Hyrule, but so much more jam-packed. Because for one, with only 4 dungeons in the game, it means there's only 4 heart containers to get, which means there are way more heart pieces in this game than any other Zelda game, way more side quests to do to increase your health. And then on top of that, in addition to having all the various items in the game, you also have an entire second set of items in the masks that are quests to go for and things to use in the overworld. And with those factors combined, you have so many more side quests to do in Majora's Mask, and with a much smaller world, it's so much more compact, so much denser. There is stuff to do everywhere, all over the place in this game. And it's because of that I think that Clock Town is probably the best town that's ever been in a Zelda game, because the amount of shit going on in this town is ridiculous. Clock Town is so fantastic, my dude. I mean, just in general, I really like the vibe and the feel of the town and, you know, all the townspeople and everything. But on top of that, because you have so many quests and you have the 3-day system in this game, the characters of Clock Town feel so much more fleshed out and real than NPCs in any previous Zelda game and several later ones. Because the NPCs have their schedules that they do at certain times on certain days, and you can see what they're doing and learn their schedule and learn what they're doing, and like they have things going on outside of you, the player, interacting with them. And that's so cool, and it makes the town feel so lively. And this is where the time loop stuff of Majora's Mask really starts to come in and make the game really interesting and fun, because a big part of Majora's Mask is about figuring out what to do in a way that's almost kind of reminiscent of Zelda 1, which I really like, but there's also this air of like mystery to things as you try to put the pieces together and figure everything out. I think one of the best examples of this would be Romani Ranch, where normally there's this giant boulder blocking it and you can't get here until the 3rd day, where the miner finally manages to destroy the boulder. Now you can get into the ranch where you meet Romani and she is all totally out of it. Something that happened on one of the previous nights that took all the cows and everything's gone and their whole ranch is now ruined, and it gets you going as the player of like wanting to figure out what happened there and okay, I have to figure out a way to get to the ranch earlier than just the 3rd day. How do I do that? And then once you finally do manage to destroy the boulder on an earlier day, now you can go to the ranch and you can see what's going on, and things are all fine, but Romani's talking about how they come at night to steal their cows. And so you do this little training exercise, and she's like, all right, be here tonight at this time, and we'll defend the ranch from when they come. And again, you're as the player like, what the hell, what's going on? And so you come here at this specific time, you're looking forward to what's gonna happen, and then there's this fucking crazy-ass minigame where you stop, like, aliens from fucking stealing the cows, and this is so, like, weird and creative and strange, and it's a fantastic payoff to that mystery of what happened earlier in the cycle. That's the kind of stuff that really gives Majora's Mask a huge edge over your typical Zelda game, and there's things like that all over the place. Obviously, the biggest quest when it comes to the timekeeping stuff is the whole Anju and Cafe thing, which is a really interesting, cool quest that's very unlike anything else in any other Zelda game. It can kind of be a little bit of a pain in the ass to do everything right, but when you do, it's really satisfying. And another thing I like about the Anju and Cafe quest is that 90% of it is all logic-based. That's something I really like about Majora's Mask. One thing I've talked about before in my previous Zelda videos is how the Zelda games are essentially Metroidvanias, and items are your various ways to interact with different things and get access to new areas. And the thing about Metroidvanias is that that whole design is essentially lock and key design. You have an obstacle that you can't get past, and that is the lock. And the key to that lock is the item or the upgrade or the ability you need to now get past that obstacle that opens that lock and allows you to go to a new area. And the thing with Metroidvanias is that you want those keys to not just be keys that open up that door, but you want them to also be gameplay elements that add something new to what you're doing. And Zelda manages to do that pretty well with a lot of its items, but some of the items in Zelda games really don't do that at all. You just use them for the thing you need to use them for and nothing else. One example of that in various Zelda games would be the hammers. Like, what do you use the hammers for? There are things that you need to hammer, and you go up to them and you use the hammer on them, and now you can go forward. That's it. You don't really use them in the gameplay in a meaningful way. They're just a key to those locks, and that's not very interesting. But another type of game that has that same kind of lock and key design are adventure games, like point-and-click adventure games. Those have puzzles, those are the locks, and the keys are the items you need to solve those puzzles. And those games manage to make it work because they use logic to be the gameplay there. You have to figure out what the key to that lock is. And that's something that exists in pretty much every Zelda game to a degree, but Majora's Mask, I feel, does it far better than any other Zelda game. I look at something like the hand quest, where it's just a hand coming out of a toilet and it's asking you for paper, and it's like, okay, how do I get paper in this game? And you go, oh yeah, I can get like the deed from the Deku Scrub there. That's paper, that can work. You know, that puzzle, it's not about pushing blocks or lighting the right torches or anything. It's just about figuring out, what do I have to do here? Or what I already mentioned before, how you have to figure out a way to get to Romani Ranch before the third day, and there's that giant boulder there. How do you get past that boulder? You can't just blow it up with a bomb or use the Goron mask to punch through it. It's way too tough of rock. But then later in the game, you can get the powder keg, which is a super powerful explosive, and you're like, aha, that's what I need to do this. I see, I get it now. And this is where the masks come into really great use in Majora's Mask. You know, I criticized Ocarina of Time for having a lot of items that you only use like once or twice, or sometimes not at all. And Majora's Mask definitely does have stuff like that, like the Kamaro mask, which you just use to dance in front of these girls, and then it's completely worthless after that. But in the lens of this being an adventure game, that's totally fine. This is the item you need to solve this puzzle. There are these girls dancing and they can't really get it right, so you need to show them a dance that's gonna inspire them. And then you get this mask from this fucking weirdo that makes you dance like this, and you're like, aha! This is the dance those girls need to see. As an item used for a logic puzzle, it makes sense that you're only going to use it once because there's not any other applications for dancing like a weirdo. And because there are so many masks, there are so many logic puzzle type items like this in the game that I think is totally fine. Like, it takes that weakness of Zelda games of having items you only use once and making that work by turning them into point-and-click adventure puzzle items. And I also don't have a problem with this because the items that are more of real items in this game are so much better utilized. The special arrows are obviously the biggest example of this because before, the fire and ice arrows were optional items that did nothing, and the light arrows you used at the very end of the game, and that was it. Now they've been turned all into the main dungeon items, and that's so good because now you actually get to use these things in really great ways. Using the fire arrows not just to light torches, but also to melt ice and various things like that. And then with the ice arrows, it's used to freeze a lot of things, so you can make ice blocks for you to go on platforms across water, but also other things like using fire and ice arrows in tandem with each other to melt and freeze various sources of water, to get the water flowing in different directions in the lake bed temple, and cool stuff like this. And then with the Stone Tower temple, I was really impressed with how it used both the mirror shield and the light arrows, because in Ocarina of Time, the mirror shield was used to reflect light onto certain things, and that would interact with them, and that was cool. But this takes that so much further in such cool ways, because you have these special mirrors where when you shine light into them, once you're done, then they will shine that light back out for the amount of time that you shined light into them. And that means you can then go up to these beams of light and reflect the light again off of your mirror shield. And then this is used for some really cool puzzles where you need to do like multiple of these in a row, shining the light into a thing and then getting into that beam to shine it onto another thing, and then getting in that beam to now shine it on the block that you need to get rid rid of. That is such a cool, interesting use of the mirror shield. It totally trounces anything that was in Ocarina of Time with how that was used. And then on top of that, you get the light arrows in this dungeon, and now suddenly everything changes, because before, what required you shining lights and stuff, it's like, well, light is what interacts with these blocks, right? Well, I have light arrows, so now I can just shoot them with the light arrows, and that just works. It all makes sense. It utilizes these items much better than the previous game. It's all around fantastic. What really impressed me with this game, revisiting it after all these years, is seeing how well it uses pretty much every single aspect of the game. Like the fact that you have the ocarina, but then when you transform into your different forms, those turn into different instruments. You know, that's a cool little thing that every form gets its own unique instrument, but then they utilize that. There's a whole side quest where you play as all of the different forms in a band, using their different instruments to all come together to fucking play the Ballad of the Windfish from Link's Awakening. That's a super cool little reference. This game leaves almost no stone unturned in terms of opportunities to use the various aspects of this game for fun, cool little gameplay sequences, and that's so great. And not only does Majora's Mask have all these cool, great things, but it also fixes so many of the issues that Ocarina of Time had, like getting around. I've already talked about how the world is much smaller and more compact in Majora's Mask, which already helps, but also fast travel has been streamlined so much, and you get access to it right at the beginning of the game, because all the owl statues are there. The moment you get to an owl statue, you can hit it, and now you can fast travel here whenever you need to. And for the shorter travel distances, you have the bunny hood and the Goron mask, which significantly speed up your way to get around. Like, honestly, straight up, I think the bunny hood should just be Link's default movement speed. It is just so much better. You go way too fucking slow in these games. And as I mentioned earlier, getting around in this game itself is also much more enjoyable, because things like rolling around as the Goron and swimming around as the Zora, it's just so much fun inherently to do. It's just very satisfying and enjoyable, so that makes the process of getting around way better than Ocarina of Time, where you're just fucking backwalking everywhere. And another thing that Majora's Mask fixes over Ocarina of Time is the side quests themselves, because I've already talked about how there's so many more side quests in Majora's Mask, but that wouldn't mean anything if not for the fact that they're also way better than the side quests in Ocarina of Time. That game has so many side quests and minigames and stuff that are just not enjoyable. But in this game, I like pretty much every single side quest in the game, and I think almost all of them are really fun. If they're not doing exploring and taking advantage of your items in cool ways, then they're going to be some kind of logic puzzle that you need to solve, or they're going to be a little quest that is way more fun and enjoyable than the stuff from Ocarina of Time. For example, the Skulltula houses, I think these are really cool little things, like micro-collectathons that you do in these two areas. They're a really nice change of pace, a unique type of little side quest that you do. I think they're awesome. And when we're talking minigames, I gotta say, I got a bit of a thing with minigames. I don't typically like them in games, because normally they just detract from the core base gameplay that's what you really want to be doing, because that's the gameplay that's actually fun. That's why I hated the fucking fishing so much in Ocarina of Time, because it has nothing to do with playing Zelda, and it sucks on its own. But I usually am pretty okay with minigames that take advantage of the core gameplay mechanics, and Majora's Mask, that's all of the minigames. You know, you have like this one with the Deku Mask, where you have to fly around to all these different platforms. This takes good advantage of this ability in a unique way that is interesting. Or you have like the Goron race that you can do, or there's a lot of bow stuff, a lot of sharpshooting minigames in this game that I think are really fun and enjoyable. I like shooting the bow. Even something as simple as this one, where you just gotta jump to all these different platforms, I find this enjoyable enough, and I like trying to see how high of a score I can get. I also find it very amusing and interesting how there are so many things in this game that are just retreads of things from Ocarina of Time, but it's kind of like the devs going, okay, but now this time it's actually gonna be good. Like, for example, you had the Dampé race that you did in Ocarina of Time, and that was pretty okay, but the race with the butler in Majora's Mask is so much more fun in this game. Or the Epona race against the Gorman brothers is way better than the race against Ingo in Ocarina of Time. The only side quest minigame in this game that I don't like is this one here where you have to race the beavers as the Zora. And the thing is, this quest is totally fine. Once again, it uses the Zora swimming in a really good way. It takes advantage of these abilities. I think it's fine. The only issue is that for no goddamn reason, you have to do this fucking thing 4 times in a row, and that's just fucking stupid. But other than that, I really enjoyed doing every quest and minigame that Majora's Mask had to offer, and that is not at all something I can say for Ocarina of Time. Oh yeah, before I forget, another thing this game totally fixes is money. For the first time in a Zelda game, I don't have any issues with how the economy works in this game. And that's thanks to the bank, because once again, there's really not that much stuff that you have to buy in this game. There's a couple of things here and there, some masks and stuff that you can buy that are very expensive, but in general, you're not using that much money again in Majora's Mask. But that problem is totally alleviated thanks to the bank, because now you have something to work toward. You have to get 5,000 rupees deposited into the bank to get a heart piece, and what's the best way to do that? Sure, you could grind for rupees, but that's gonna take forever and be fucking boring. The better way to do that is to just play through the game, and anytime you fill up your wallet or you're about to reset the loop, deposit all your rupees into the bank, and then that'll just carry over into the next loop, and you just do that over the course of the game. Which means money actually matters now. You do want to go out of your way to collect as much money as you can so you can keep depositing it. Now, all those chests filled with rupees are not a waste of your goddamn time. Now they're things that you actually care about. And while in Ocarina of Time, I would sometimes open up a chest of rupees when my wallet was full and go, okay, whatever, in this game, I'd be like, fuck no, I just wasted that money. I should have deposited my rupees. I'm an idiot. And that is such a more fun reaction for the player to have to something like that. The fact that I felt that way to that kind of thing demonstrates that I actually care about getting money now, which is great. Honestly, playing the 2 games back-to-back, which is something I've never actually done before, it almost makes it feel like Ocarina of Time was like the proof of concept and Majora's Mask is the real game. Like, they took everything that they had in Ocarina of Time and they're like, okay, now we're actually gonna make it good. And then all those improved elements combined with all the new, unique, cool, interesting stuff that Majora's Mask has, and it makes a game that is so rich and interesting in a way that no other Zelda game is. Like, something I really enjoy about Majora's Mask is trying to do as much as I possibly can in a single loop, trying to squeeze in as many objectives and quests as possible without having to restart. And then when doing that, it adds even further cool elements to the game where you have like time management stuff where like I was doing the Romani Ranch stuff and Romani was like, all right, come back at this time. I was like, okay. But instead of just playing the Song of Double Time to get to that time, I wanted to take better advantage of the cycle. So I left and started doing a bunch of other side quests, and I was keeping track of the time and being like, okay, I gotta head over to the Romani Ranch now to make my appointment. And like, that was so fun and cool, and like trying to cram in as many quests as I could, juggling all these different things, running back and forth all over the place, and it was super quick and easy thanks to the great fast travel and speedy maneuvering of this game. It was so much goddamn fun, and it got to points where, like, that one Dompe quest that is still kind of relatively boring, it was really fucking tense because I was trying to do a bunch of other stuff, and then I was like, oh fuck, I'm out of time, I gotta get in here and fucking do this before I fucking run out of time and the fucking loop ends. And it turned this normally fairly boring quest into something where I'm like, come on, come on, come on, go old man, get this shit done, I gotta do this before I run out of time. Like, it was so cool. And it really makes me want to try one day seeing how few loops I can 100% Majora's Mask in, you know, really trying to optimize your routing and plan out, okay, I'll do this side quest and then that one, and just trying to get as many things done as you can over the course of every single loop to finish the game in as few loops as possible. I bet you that would be a really cool, fun thing to do. I really want to do that someday. This game, boy howdy, I tells ya, this game is really fucking good. Like, really fucking good. Honestly, even that is underplaying it. I straight up think Majora's Mask is a phenomenal game, even by Zelda standards. This game is so creative and cool and unique and interesting and so much fun to play. It's kind of a weird way to describe it, but honestly, I feel like this game is so good that it doesn't feel like an old game. What this game feels like to me is like a modern indie game, like, masterpiece that comes out every now and then that you're like, holy shit, I actually can't believe how fucking good that game is, something like a Hollow Knight or a Hat in Time. Because games that work this well, where everything comes together in such fantastic ways, that's really rare for big games, even for the Zelda series. Like, this game is such a game, you know what I'm saying? Like, someone had a really interesting, unique vision for a game that they wanted to make, and they made that game, and it came together in this awesome fucking thing that's just so goddamn good. It's no wonder this game is such a beloved cult classic in the Zelda series. I don't know if I would personally say it's my favorite Zelda game, but it's definitely one of the best Zelda games, and if you ask me, it is much better than every Zelda game that came before it. It's not even remotely close. This game is fucking awesome. The only things that I would give major criticism to this game is one thing it doesn't improve over Ocarina of Time is the combat. It's still exactly the same as it was in that game, which is not very good. Though for this playthrough, I decided to do a bit of an experiment just to see how it would go and not use Z-targeting very much, just fighting manually for the most part. And I thought that worked pretty well, and certain enemy encounters, they felt really fun that way. In particular, the ninja dudes that you fight sometimes toward the end of the game, they're pretty fun to fight without Z-targeting, but yeah, in general, the combat is still not great. And that transfers over to the other big problem of the game, which is the boss fights. I didn't mention the boss fights in my Ocarina of Time video because I don't really have that much to say about them. They're pretty much the same as the bosses from A Link to the Past. They're pretty good, they take advantage of the item that you got from the dungeon very well, and so on and so forth. I think the bosses in Ocarina of Time are fine. But the bosses in Majora's Mask, they fucking suck. They straight up are just bad. Because, like, you have the first boss fight against Adalwa, which literally you just run up to the boss and hit him with your sword until he dies. That's the fight. It's so fucking terrible. The second fight is actually pretty okay, where you're using the Goron form to chase after the bull. That's alright, I like that one. But then the fish boss fight is kind of weird and awkward, and it takes too long to do. And the final boss fight, this is one where I give the 3DS version major props. It improved this boss fight a lot, because in the original game, this boss fight sucked hard. And I gotta admit, as cool as the Fierce Deity Mask is, I'm not necessarily a fan of the fact that it makes the final boss fight a total joke. It works nicely as a reward for doing all the side quests in the game, but at the same time, it's also like, I would like to fight the final boss, you know what I mean? Though, unfortunately, even if you do fight the final boss legit, it doesn't even really make that much of a difference because the bosses in this game suck and the final boss is no different. That's pretty unfortunate. I think they could have done something much cooler with the Fierce Deity Mask. Like, I would have preferred for, like, the 3DS remake, what they should have done is they should have made it so that if you get the Fierce Deity Mask, then during the final boss fight, after you beat Majora's Wrath, it would have been much cooler if the Demon of Majora completely broke free of the mask. Because, you know, that's the whole thing with Majora's Mask. There's the Demon Majora trapped inside of it, and as you fight the final boss, Majora breaks more and more out of the mask. But even in the final form, you are still fighting the mask. It would have been cool if they added an additional fourth phase that you can only fight as Fierce Deity Link, where it's actually a real fight that you don't just cheese your way through, and this is when you're fighting not Majora's Mask, but Majora itself. That would have been pretty cool, but oh well. Aside from those two problems, I think Majora's Mask is an incredible game. I love the shit out of it. And that's just when we're talking about the game stuff of Majora's Mask. Of course, there's also, like, the story and aesthetic stuff to talk about as well. I'm not gonna get too much into it because everybody has already talked that stuff to death, but this game is so bizarre and strange in such a fantastic way. You know, the whole idea of Majora's Mask and having the whole game themed around these masks and everything, it's such an inspired and creative direction to take this game into, and then you throw the time loop on top of that, and you make all the people weird and all this stuff going on in the town. It's so interesting. And the fact that this game deals with kind of like grimmer elements to it, I think are really cool. Like the masks that you get, the fact that they're not just like magical masks that transform you into different species, but they're actually the spirits of individual characters that lived in this world that you're taking their form. And the NPCs have relationships with these characters, and then when you wear the mask, they think you're that person, and it kind of brings in like this weird element of like, this is kind of morally fucked up that I'm tricking these people into thinking that I'm their dead loved one and all this fucking weird shit going on, and it kind of makes you ponder what you're doing, and it's a little bit weird. Plus then, of course, you have everything with the Skull Kid and the Four Giants and the Festival of Time and how all those things are related and all the cool stuff going on there. Like, Majora's Mask is just such an interesting, macabre, fun, weird, grim game. Like, I absolutely love the whole aesthetic of what this game is doing. You know, it's not a dark game, it's not a scary game, but it has that kind of twisted element to it that makes everything feel a little bit off kilter, and you know, that's very well done at the very beginning of the game when you're going through the tunnel and everything is twisting around as you enter Termina, and it's like, you've just entered a weird fucking place, and that comes through very well throughout the game. Plus, you have the moon and the impending destruction of the entire world and how that influences all the different aspects of the game. How, you know, in the first day, people are just kind of ignoring it. Nah, it's fine, but some people are talking about, like, does the moon look a little bit bigger to you today? And then by the third day, people are panicking and they've given up and they're like, we're all gonna fucking die. People are trying to get away to safety and stuff like that. You know, the desperation that comes from the whole situation, it adds some weightiness to it and some humanity that, once again, it makes these characters feel so much more alive than other Zelda games. And I could keep going on and on and on, but you get the point. This game fucking rules. One last quick thing I want to talk about is a bit of a personal lamentation. It's something that I thought would have been really cool that they never ended up doing. Because I really like these 3DS versions of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. I think Grezzo did a really good job on them. I know, you know, Majora's Mask has some problems, but overall I think these are really great versions of these games. And I really would have loved if after making Majora's Mask 3D, it would have been so insanely cool if Grezzo got to make a brand new original 3DS Ocarina-style Zelda game, like using the same engine and assets and tools and stuff from these two games, build a brand new Zelda game that almost would be something that, like, it's in the style of the N64 games, as if it was a remake of a third N64 Zelda game that never existed. You have the perfect framework for it already, because you have Ocarina of Time where you play as Kid Link and Adult Link, and then the second game you play the entire thing as Kid Link, so then you have a third game where you do the whole thing as Adult Link, and that'd be fucking perfect. Let us follow up with the hero of time, you know, 7 years of real-time growth later. What's he doing? Give him one last adventure to finish off that character. You know, that would have been so cool. But they didn't do it, and that's pretty unfortunate, and obviously that ship has definitely long since sailed by this point, so that kind of thing is never gonna happen. And it's like, damn it, that would have been fucking cool. Oh well, missed opportunities, what you gonna do? Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.